For more discussion on that topic, we're joined by Pyotr Kurzin. He's the host of the Global Gambit YouTube podcast, a former UN official, geopolitical expert, coming to us from London, and one of our favorite guests on this topic. So, Pyotr, good to have you with us back again. I'll jump right into it. Is what we saw last night, Thursday, is this Vladimir Putin's response to really President Trump's most recent diplomatic efforts?
Well, I'm surprised that you put diplomatic and Trump in the same sentence, but no, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Look, this is partially symbolic, but it's also significant. Symbolic in the sense that Putin always ups the ante, so to speak, escalation pressure when we have a NATO summit, something of a significance. He does it in the fall when NATO has exercises, and he does it around VD Day or Russia's Victory Day, as we saw at the beginning of May. There's always a timing. And what's interesting is that Russia has rejected, or said that Ukraine rejected, efforts for a temporary ceasefire over a prisoner swap effort, which these two have done multiple times during the war. So Russia is still trying to put the blame on Ukraine and vis-a-vis NATO more broadly as the proxy, as the aggressor here. But this is significant because it demonstrates that Ukraine does have a supply shortage. This is always the issue that a lot of military analysts will emphasize, that whilst Ukraine does remarkably good things with innovation, drone warfare, humanitarian, human troop supply, and so on, doing quite a lot with not very much, this continuous supply of arms, ammunition, and so on is critical. And so when you've got these bottlenecks from differences of perspective from the US to Europe, who doesn't have its own military production yet, this is where we see these shortfalls. So yeah, this is a pretty big scale, but it's also in the context of Ukraine striking Russia at unprecedented rates right now.
Yes, this one of the important thing to bring up here. I mean, we've seen, the disruption of, gas lines in Russia, the disruption of their infrastructure, Ukraine's ability to sort of seemingly strike further and further. And I think this has to do with what appears to be the recent, I'll call it slight warming of President Trump towards Ukraine and President Zelensky. Where does this leave President Trump's, challenges or dealings with this war at large?
Well, as I've said, naively perhaps, or with wishful thinking, hope that Trump would come round to recognizing that Putin is the problem. I've learned many times that that's not correct in my own commentary and podcast interviews. But I think in this case, it is different in that Trump is being more consistent or more frequent with his criticisms and less so of Zelensky. Right. I think we need to recognize the limitations of Ukraine, but Trump seems to recognize more specifically that Putin is the one who is not really interested in peace, despite him claiming that he is. So I do think that there is maybe a subtle growing leniency or acceptance of this by Trump, in that he will be more keen to allow the Ukrainians access to Patriot missile blueprints, the Europeans to increase their supply or purchasing of American equipment to then give to Ukraine. So you could see those sorts of things happening during the NATO summit this week. But again, none of it's like an immediate game changer. That's not going to happen overnight. So people who think this war is wrapped up by the end of this year, I'm still skeptical of that. But certainly what comes out of this NATO summit will be important for Ukraine most of all.
Well, it certainly seems that things have changed a while since that. I would argue only one of the most cringeworthy Oval Office meetings we've seen in the last couple of years. That was up there, the Zelensky visit in the Oval Office. Very much cringe, but moving on from that, apparently, with President Trump changing his perspectives. Pyotr, thanks for being with us.
No worries. Thanks a lot.